Select Committee, who I know are looking at this at the moment. Right. Can we now move on, please, to the 10-minute rule bill? Dr. Thérèse Coffey.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I beg to move that leave be given to bring in a bill to make provision about licences authorising the driving of motor vehicles of certain classes and for connected purposes. The principal purpose of this bill is to reform Section 5.2 of the Motor Vehicles Driving Licences Regulations 1999. These are EU rules that were put into UK law and reduced the number of vehicles that could be driven after passing a general motoring licence test. So-called grandfather rights were maintained for people like me who had passed their driving test prior to 1997 to continue to be able to drive certain categories of vehicles, including minibuses and medium-sized goods vehicles, which fall under the categories D1 and C1. In particular, I'm seeking reform to our driving licences so that the C1 and D1 categories are automatically given to everybody who has passed a driving test for a car in the same way that happened for those of us who passed our test before 1997. This opportunity is a Brexit bonus and to reform driving licence regulations that were put in place thanks to our membership of the EU is motivated by my intention to firstly support rural communities and secondly unlock economic growth opportunities. I recently raised this issue in the House in a debate on the 31st of January and gave notice then of my intention to seek to change the law. Other honourable members voiced their support for a change, particularly focused on community transport and the D1 category. While I do not seek to repeat everything I said in that debate, since then the Community Transport Association and others have contacted me to voice their full support for a change in the law. This whole issue first came to my attention when I visited Halesworth Area Community Transport in my constituency and was told about its challenges in getting more drivers. To drive a van for that not-for-profit organisation, and indeed drive a minibus for that not-for-profit organisation as it then was, people had to pay £2,000 to £3,000 to do a course and pass a test to acquire a D1 licence due to the regulations. This problem was reinforced when I visited the Volunteer Help Centre in Southwold, who told a similar story. When I went to see the then Transport Minister, I was told that they were EU regulations and that as long as we were part of the EU, there was absolutely no way we could change them. Now, the Community Transport Association has given me further examples, including Bexhill Community Bus, who stated that we are a small community bus operator and we rely on persons with D1 on their licence. We are facing a future when Cat B drivers lose the automatic right to drive a minibus and would face the expense of training all new volunteer drivers. Or indeed from Changing Lives Together, an organisation in Cheshire who've supported a change in the law, saying this is very much needed, we are recruiting from a smaller pool of people every year and it's causing real problems across our area. This is particularly challenging for community transport associations that help people with disabilities in their daily lives. This was recognised in the government's National Disability Strategy, and there was a commitment from the Department for Transport to help tackle shortages in community transport drivers. It is clear there is a real need for reform for making it easier to acquire a D1 licence to support such community transport ventures and other uses of a D1 licence to support our rural communities and avoid losing such services or turning them into exclusively paid services. I turn to the benefits of reform of C1 licences. These are for medium-sized goods vehicles, not HGVs. These are the kind used to do a lot of local delivery jobs, but also applies to horse boxes and vehicles like an ambulance. And I suggest that by opening up this category, perhaps with some conditions like a minimum age of, say, 25 or having to have held a driving licence for 2 or more years, this would open up an instant economic boost without a cost to government and help productivity in the supply chain. Now, we have experienced in recent years a shortage of HGV drivers due to a number of factors, particularly during COVID. And one of the reasons why there was a shortage is that HGV drivers had started switching to jobs using these medium-sized vehicles, for which they were automatically qualified by holding an HGV licence. The department then took some sensible temporary measures to help address that shortage. Now, as an aside, Mr Deputy Speaker, regarding cost of acquiring a C1 licence, this is typically £2,000 to £3,000, similar to the D1 licence. But for HGV driving qualifications, there are apprenticeship courses available, allowing businesses to use their apprenticeship levy funding. However, there is not one for securing a C1 driving licence, and I've been informed that previous attempts to secure one have been rejected, as it is not considered that a 12-month course and practical experience is needed to gain this qualification. Now, within government, I've been trying to persuade the Department of Transport to look at this opportunity, and I was delighted when they issued a call for evidence in August 2022. As the then Minister wrote in its foreword, my honourable friend, the member for Lincoln, the licensing improvements regarding HGV drivers, to which I referred above, were achievable partly due to the fact that we had left the European Union and had the freedom to change our legislation to improve our testing and licensing regime. The call for evidence includes seeking evidence on the economic benefits of widening the recruitment pool for medium-sized goods vehicles and minibus drivers, which may attract more people to the industry and support economic growth by further strengthening our supply chain. Mr Deputy Speaker, there was exceptionally strong support for the changes to both C1 and D1 licences, and I particularly commend the submission made by the Community Transport Association regarding D1. Businesses also gave very strong support to C1 changes, citing significant economic advantages. Reasons given included it would be much more efficient to run a single trip in a 4.6-tonne van than to be restricted to multiple trips, as it would require fewer journeys to transport the goods. In essence, it would mean fewer vehicles on the road and fewer trips. That is good news for the economy and also good news for the environment. In that same summary, though, it was pretty clear that the Department did not want to make any changes, which disappointed me. But as is self-evident, I have not given up, as I think these simple changes would bring both economic growth and be hugely beneficial for rural communities. I'm also aware that the East of England Ambulance Service were hindered in new drivers being able to drive ambulances due to delays in C1 assessments, despite them already undertaking advanced driver training, the Blues and Twos as known, for emergency vehicles. I'm pleased to say that has now been rectified, but nevertheless, there was still a barrier. Further, while I'm in the mood for sensible reform through this bill, I think we should consider the economic benefits of extending the lifetime of driving licences, which, due to EU law, are currently at 10 years for a car and 5 years for several other vehicles, including those for driving horse boxes. This feels unnecessarily burdensome and would be benefit not only the cost of processing, but also the cost to drivers across the country. Now, I know that my honourable friend, the Minister, is listening hard to these proposals for reform, and I welcome some of the discussions we've already had. I do suggest to the Government that reforms would be exceptionally popular with community transport associations across the country and with businesses large and small. I do understand the issues raised regarding safety. I consider that driving tests have become considerably more difficult since I passed my test, but I do think there is a way to address some of the concerns raised by certain campaign groups. I'm also aware that the Government signed up to the Vienna Convention in 2018, and though these regulations were already in place, and indeed we have applied various reservations to that convention so as not to disrupt our common sense practices in this country that we have, like not having to wait for the green light of a pedestrian crossing to cross the road when no traffic is coming in either direction, which, as we may know, is a criminal offence in other countries in Europe. Mr Speaker, I believe this is a real opportunity to adopt some sensible approaches, and that, as I say, would be welcome across the House. It would be a Brexit bonus, it would increase community transport, it would remove an unnecessary costly barrier for business, and recognising the strengthening of the driving test in the past 25 years, we should have the confidence to back British drivers with British rules. I would like to work with the Government during the passage of this bill, and I commend it for introduction and to proceed towards a second reading.
Question is, the Right Honourable Lady have leave to bring in her bill. Before I call the Honourable Gentleman, could I just gently remind him that this has to be a speech in opposition to the bill. I take it that the Honourable Gentleman wishes to speak in opposition to the motion. Sir Chris Bryant.
Sir Roger, I'm very grateful for your reminding me that I have to speak in opposition to the legislation, but since the Government itself opposes the measure, as the member herself has just pointed out, I would presume that the Government's going to be opposing this measure as well this afternoon. Let's be clear. Not all the measures that come from the right whilst I commend the Right Honourable Lady for her diligence as a backbench member coming to this House and making a series of different 10-minute rule measures over the last year. For instance, last year she brought forward the Schools Gender and Parental Rights Bill, which fell at the first hurdle because it didn't get second reading. 40 people voted no and 34 voted aye. We have the same right to do so today if we think that her measure is neither appropriate, relevant or necessary. So let me go through. She referred, Sir Roger, to the fact that she considers this to be...
Order. Other members may not wish to hear the honourable gentleman, but I do, and I need to know whether the honourable gentleman is in order. So it would be helpful if honourable members could either, if they want to have private conversations, have them outside, or keep quiet. Sir Chris Bryant.
I'm grateful, Sir Roger. My main objection is that the Honourable Lady seeks to make this a Brexit bonus, as she referred to it. I disagree with that very concept for a start, because I believe that regulatory convergence rather than regulatory divergence is probably more useful, both in terms of British drivers knowing where they stand driving in this country and in other countries in Europe, and secondly, in terms of other European drivers being able to drive in the UK. Of course, there are other areas where there might be Brexit bonuses, because you might, for instance, be trading with other countries elsewhere in the world. But when it comes to driving licences, specifically, the only other countries that we are likely to be dealing with are other countries within the European Union. So I believe, and I think the government believes too, because so far the Department for Transport has refused to budge in the direction that the Right Honourable Member suggests, that this is an inappropriate measure that would do harm rather than good and would not lead to greater safety, would actually imperil safety in the UK. Secondly, we signed up to the Vienna Conventions in 2018. And of course, Sir Roger, as you know, exemptions are allowed under the Vienna Convention. The Right Honourable Lady, in her previous speech on this matter, pointed out that one of the exemptions that we've introduced relates to when you can cross the road in the UK when a traffic light seems to suggest that you can't. That, under the Vienna Convention, we would not normally be able to do, but we have been able to amend it. So there is an argument, which the Right Honourable Lady has not made, that this legislation is not necessary to achieve the same end that she is trying to achieve. She also refers to the £2,000 to £3,000 fee. She makes a legitimate point here, which is that some charities would like to be able to use minibuses, which, when they are fully loaded, do go over the 3.5-tonne limit. And the £2,000 to £3,000 fee is a significant one, which can impede them from being able to do their work as we would all want them to do. However, that is a matter that is in the power of government without any legislative need for any legislation. The further point, Sir Roger, is that the government has so far consulted, as she referred to, on this measure, but has decided not to proceed. It would be useful, I think, if the government were able to tell us why it's not chosen to proceed. My suspicion is that that's because it believes that this would not be a measure that would be safe. The Right Honourable Lady also said that she wanted to extend in this legislation the length of time for which a licence fee is provided. Now, this would be clearly in direct contravention of the Vienna Convention. Presently, it is set at 10 years. I personally think that that is the safest way in this country to make sure that every driver on the road has a valid driving licence, which is actually up to date, has the correct address on it, and that the person may well be properly insured. I'm sure many of us in this country, in our own constituencies, have come across cases where people have been financially disadvantaged because the crash that they have been involved in has been with somebody who hasn't got a proper driving licence, it's out of date, and they're not properly insured. I think that the Right Honourable Lady's measure would drive a coach and horses, if you forgive the pun, through that. There is, Sir Roger, another issue, which is that in recent years we have had a significant problem with getting enough HGV drivers in the UK. Now, I believe that this measure would make that substantially more difficult. That adds costs to businesses up and down the country. It makes it more difficult because many of the present HGV drivers driving on British roads are not British, they are of other nationalities. If you have a separate set of regulations for the UK, completely separate for the UK from the rest of the European Union, then you simply make it more difficult for businesses to do their work, and you also increase an additional layer of regulatory burden, which is a cost to businesses. My final point, Sir Roger, my final point is that at the moment, on the order paper at the moment, there are 78 private members' bills listed. That would call to be read for second reading on the 23rd of February, the 1st of March, the 15th of March or the 22nd of March, all of which before the final date for a general election on the 2nd of May. I think not a single one of them will probably enter the statute books. There are actually 26 in the name of members called Christopher, and I feel rather left out that not one of them comes from myself. But the serious point is that we keep on putting more bills onto the order paper and not taking them off and putting them onto the statute book, because we still have a system for 10-minute rule bills and private members' bills which is completely and utterly bust. The Procedure Committee has time and time and time again said that we bring the whole process into disrepute, and that's why we shouldn't be adding yet another 10-minute rule bill to the order paper when we have no intention of putting it on the statute book. I therefore urge all honourable members to vote against the measure today.
Question is, the right honourable lady have leave to bring in her bill. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. No. Division, clear the lobbies. Is that the right honourable lady have leave to bring in her bill. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. No. Tell us for the ayes, Flick Drummond and Justin Tomlinson. Tell us for the noes, Jeff Smith and Christian Wakeford.
the laws. Can the sergeant look into the law lobby? Order.
The ayes to the right, 63. The noes to the left, 81.
The ayes to the right, 63. The noes to the left, 81. The noes have it, and look,